Blue Mind is a platform to raise consciousness and to elevate your performance and develop your physical and emotional health. We interview experts in mind and body, writers, sports people, entrepreneurs, and those with an inspiring story to tell to help us all raise our performance to the next level. So welcome to Blue Mind. Hello, welcome again to the Blue Mind podcast or show, Mark calls it. I'm here this week with, next to me on a bed, with Alison Pilling, who's actually a sex coach. And hopefully, Mark, you're in the studio in front of the wall, the brick wall again this week.
I am indeed.
Frozen.
Hello, guys.
Hello, that's guys. Good timing.
Alison, welcome. Yeah, I'm here, Ed.
Yeah, you froze for a bit now. We'll carry on. Let's rock, raring to go for this one.
I'm raring to go.
Well, good. We'll come on to that later. So this week, the title of the podcast is Men and Sex. Hence the reason we're on a bed, and I'm here with Alison, a good friend in Corfu at the moment. And we're going to talk about an hour about a whole array of topics about sex, about fantasies, about men and sex, about hang-ups, about transparency, honesty, all the things that perhaps we wish we'd have known a long time ago, and things that we're curious about. And welcome, Alison, to we're actually sitting on Alison's bed. Which is very nice here. But it's a bit of staging comedy, by the way. How are you?
Be here.
How are you? Good.
It's great being in Corfu in the sunshine. It's very nice.
Yes, we are both in Corfu, and it's 22 degrees today. And,
beautiful.
It's been great. So we've both been on the same beach at the very separate ends, I believe. So by way of introduction, Alison is creator and host of the Sex Lectures. She's now a sex coach, mentor, and writer. She started her sexuality journey midlife, spending the last decade on a personal and professional journey through the erotic realms towards personal and erotic freedom. Sounds pretty powerful. Exploring the world of conscious sexuality in myriad ways helps find purpose and freedom. She says that we can experience pleasure and healing in many ways. So a focus on self-awareness, embodiment, consent, and emotional intelligence means we broaden the variety of what we do to make connection clear and pleasure erotic. So welcome, Alison. Is there anything you'd like to add about what you do, perhaps by way of an intro?
My professional title is a sexological body worker, which is how I get the Sex Geek t-shirt.
Oh, yes. Wearing. Okay. Yeah.
And my experience is also in Tantra. And then I've also trained with different teachers in the world in Conscious Kink and the Wheel of Consent.
Okay.
So, and often it was for me because, at 50, I hadn't had very much experience either. And I had this sense that I think many people have is, I'm sure there's something more to this, but I have no idea what it is. And I think hitting 50 really made me think I wanted to know what it wasn't. I wouldn't have, if someone had said to me, ask for what you want, I wouldn't have known what to ask for. And although that's one of the skills, overcoming shyness, but how do we know what it is we want? But we can imagine there's something and we don't know what it is. And I think, in a way, I think it was my innocence that took me into finding about all of this rather than, because awful things had happened. But, we can all get into this topic through different ways, really.
Sure. But so let's kick off with the first question. Is there anything you want to add, Mark, in terms of the intro to this, or should we just kick on into the first question?
Let's crack on it. I am here to learn. You're here to learn.
Yes, I think we're all here to learn. I certainly am. Anyway, that's just yeah. So anyway, just a bit of a conduit into this. I mean, these are complex and difficult topics, running against some quite deep-rooted, complex cultural stereotypes. And we'll get into that in a minute. We're assuming the objective from this podcast is a discussion around is a fulfillment of sexuality or sexual fulfillment that enhances people's lives. Now, obviously, in the backdrop to that is that everyone has different relationship types, whether it's monogamy or polyamory or married or single or dating on Tinder, or so again, we're trying to fit in a topic around and heteronormative versus different types of sexuality. So we assume that we're talking to people of all of those varieties because it's the internet, and who knows who's going to see it. So if we come across talking about something from a heterosexual male perspective, of course, it may be slightly different to people of different, to women or to men or to people of different gender bias. So it's a complex issue. We obviously can't get all of it covered in, what is sex to men or women in 1 hour, but we're going to do our best to cover off the some of the main topics that we feel that men are coming to us with, or we're experiencing, or we're talking to men in the pub, or in your case, Mark, in the cricket pavilion on a Saturday afternoon. So again, we're not assuming people who are in long-term relationships, or indeed how old you are, or anything else. So the first question.
So if you don't mind, and I'm very conscious I've interrupted you, I just feel like now would be a good time for me to explain, maybe in a bit more detail, why I believe this is a very, very important conversation, and why we have Alison here. And it might relate to the people listening, which we're aware of is predominantly a male audience. So why am I here? Why am I here to learn? I am a heterosexual man who grew up in a Catholic home, and the language and the wording and the narrative around sex was that it was bad, that you do not have sex before marriage. Parents would tell stories how they were the only people they'd ever slept with. This was the narrative. If became a teenager, started to raise curiosity, you're hearing about it being discussed at school. It's all very confusing. You then fast forward a few years, you then start learning about sex through pornography. And that is your sex education. The sex education at school is extremely basic, and it might cover different, like from a biological perspective. But I believe this is the case for many men, that their sex education came from porn, and they then enter relationships, intimate relationships, the first time, believing that that is the way to treat a woman. And that was my belief for multiple serious relationships. And it is only post-divorce, having done some reading, having gained some insight, that you start to learn about Alison Tantra, about different forms of intimacy, more of an understanding about women and what it is that how different women operate in different ways, etc. So if that relates to anyone listening, this is going to be a very powerful and insightful conversation for you. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Mark.
Cool.
I think I'll just get straight in. So I think we all have a belief that sex is important in a relationship, or maybe it isn't. That's certainly what I think the common perception is. So Alison, this is a question for you, first one. Is, again, very topical, is great regular sex needed for a happy, functioning relationship? And what is sex? And maybe we can touch on that to kick us off into this barrel of complex discussions. What is sex, Alison? Please.
Often what people think of sex is what we might call PIV sex, penis in vagina sex, which is like a little conveyor belt that you can start off with some kissing and some, some oral sex, but all roads are leading to Rome, which is orgasm, and then who knows, match of the day or
a cigarette or
something.
Yes.
Yeah.
like in the film.
Yeah. And if you can both have an orgasm at the same time, excellent. And but if we think of that as the definition of sex, we're missing the idea of sex in a broader sense, which might be better we could think of actually what's the point of it, and maybe thinking about that pleasure and connection instead of all roads lead to Rome of, you know, this intended orgasm. But if we thought of it in that way, that might change what we did. So rather than get on this conveyor belt or whatever it is that you've seen in porn or, you know, in our fantasies, what if that was about touch, it was about connection, and it was about self-awareness or understanding, or being a place of refuge or a place of playfulness. And so I think this sense of what sex is such a limited, I mean, I think that I grew up in a Catholic household as well, but taking this personal and professional journey in the last 10 years of realizing that sexuality is so combined with your creativity, with your power, you know, and so actually to just limit sex to that conveyor belt, which, you know, nothing wrong with an orgasm or everything, it can be really, really quite nice.
But let's go back a little. I mean, we're all animals, I believe. So there's a very natural need and desire for us to want to have sex. Now, there's different things that are sparking that, maybe for men and women, and we can talk about sexual appetite and how women respond to sexual touch. And men, I believe, are 80% spontaneous. Women are the concept that they're more responsive. So it's inverse. So men generally can perform and think about sex a lot more. This is a myth that maybe it's not correct, but men can be able to have sex pretty immediately because they're wired that way. Whereas I think women have a much more of a receptive kind of sexual energy. Whilst they're still capable of having spontaneous sex, their bodies are different. Now, I think we're living in an era where I think most men understand that the male sexuality and the ability to orgasm is a very different journey perhaps than women's are. And I think we don't need to dwell on the fact that men and women are generally different. And we're generalizing here in terms of arousal and in terms of orgasm, in terms of the ability to orgasm and everything else. So we take that for granted that men and women in relationships know that. And I'm going around all kinds of circles here. And you might need to help me because I've lost my train of thought. But I wanted to go back to we're animals, because the reality is it there for this long-term monogamy? Let's go straight into this. When you think about what we're created for, if we compare ourselves to a chimpanzee, the male role in that and the female role defines a lot of what goes on in society. However, I think where we're going to go with this conversation is that that's no longer seen as the modus operandi of life, because women are more empowered sexually, and those roles, those natural roles of how a male of the species operates and a female of the species in the human species has changed dramatically, I think, where women are now empowered sexually. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but if we have that natural urge, the thing I want to say is, well, does that fit within the confines of a marriage and a long-term relationship? Because the reality is, whether we like it or not, is that culturally, socially, we are just expected to get married, have a family, be monogamous, and that's your life. So that's fine, but it's not by any stretch of imagination the only way to lead your life. And I think it's the context of that is hopefully then going on to, well, how do you gain sexual pleasure, and what kind of relationship are you in, and what kind of life do you choose to lead? Because we come at it, Mark, as two divorced, middle-aged-ish guys, both divorced, and there's a very big conversation around sex within different types of relationships. And there isn't really a question in any of that, and I've gone off on a right tangent, but I'm hoping it's maybe some useful context. Maybe it's some useful context is that I don't want to stop. I'm trying to get my head around. Mark, help me here.
Okay, so what I've heard there, Ed, is
3 points.
You feel you're asking about this natural urge. You believe that we're animals, that we have natural urges. Does that fit in society's model of correctness around being married and committing to one individual? Is that correct?
Yes, I think that was a question. Alison, any thoughts on that?
Well,
in my 8 points.
as someone who's never been married but been through
Okay.
3 divorces, I think
Oh.
Not that I was the cause of any of them, but
Allegedly.
you know, life is long, and it depends on who you meet. But once we get aware that we have choices and we don't have to do what we're conditioned, then what is it that we're going to choose? I'm not entirely sure that this idea of, someone sent me an article the other day about menopause in Wales, and I was just kind of going, oh God, why are scientists on boat watching whales and telling me about menopause? You know, it's just like, but I've tried lots of different relationship styles. I've been single. Actually, the one thing I haven't tried is marriage. But it strikes me that I didn't get married because I think I always knew that it would trap me. And I think this is a lot of people's experience in marriage, which, you know, there's ethical non-monogamy now, which we're hearing more about, or polyamory, and then people have had affairs. So, you know, a bit of non-ethical non-monogamy. But this idea that we are going to stay only attracted to one person all of our lives does strike me as a kind of lovely idea, but almost impossible to live up to. So is that just not about honesty and how we have the conversation about what expectations are, rather than, because this natural urge for sex, what's that for? It could be for pleasure, it could be for affirmation, it could be reaching for comfort. You know, it's a feeling, but you're hungry 3 times a day, you don't always eat, you know. So it's always a choice. So then it's more, what are we going to do to make this satisfying, connecting, and something that we can be open about and stand in ourselves with it, you know, rather than, I don't know, living lives.
Yeah, it's a very complex one, because if you're in a marriage and you've gone into a marriage, and I mean, it's complex, because there may be people who would never have that conversation with their partner, because ultimately they don't want to raise topics of sexuality, like, you know, I'm attracted to somebody else. And we talked a little bit about this, I think, before, Mark. It takes a very brave and strong relationship, if you're in a monogamous long-term relationship with a committed relationship, for someone to broach the subject of, you know, my sexual attraction to you is changed, I'm attracted to other people. It's not something, let's be quite honest about it, that most people in a long-term relationship are going to raise at the dinner table and say, I'm a little bit bored of our sex life, and by the way, I've got the hots for the dude in accounting. Okay, I'm presuming I'm a woman here, because it works both ways. So I know, I mean, again, we're making assumptions for everybody, and maybe we just assume that this happens, but people generally don't talk about it because it's probably not got good news for a long-term relationship. What would you say to people who are watching this, who maybe do fantasize? Maybe I know a lot of my male friends who are married are using porn, and they're not telling their partners about it. So, and it's a very common thing with a lot of the guys that we talk to. So secrets make you sick. Why are people afraid of not telling their partner they're using porn, which is, I would probably suggest, is a bad thing to be using it, and not talking to their partner about their sexual fantasies and appetites and people that they find attractive? What do you think that is? Whether they're presuming they're in a relationship, is that cultural? Are we afraid?
Well, I imagine the things that stop people are fear, shame, reprisal, the consequences. So it's not difficult to understand why we don't. I wonder if the more useful question is, how do we have those I mean, sometimes we need secrets to ourselves. And actually, you know, while porn does have effect on bodies and shortens arousal cycles, and especially in younger people, you know, you see a lot of erectile dysfunction. But one of my teachers used to teach embodied porn. So if you watch it and then you're really connected into your body rather than your attention being on a screen out there, then actually it can be a much, can be quite a fulfilling experience rather than a jerk off and go. But yeah,
we'll talk about jerking off in a minute. Mark, do you want to jump in? Do you want to jump in there? Sounds a bit weird. Another euphemism. Double entendre jokes. Anything to say there?
I really like that. I think you've been quite vulnerable in this conversation, Ed, but there's been a few times where you felt that you were going around the houses. And I think this is the nature of this conversation, that it is difficult to you're finding it difficult to ask what it is that you want to put forward. And that is a very brave and courageous, as in this is an example of how difficult it is. What I liked about what Alison said, she's talking about the truth here, right? And honesty. Why is it? And I'm not sure if it's the same for women. I'd be very interested to understand if that is the case. Why is it that most men, including myself, and definitely at points in my life, why is it that we have found it difficult to ask for what we sexually desire and want? And you touched on it about shame and fear there. What we desire, where does that come from? You talked about being animals there, but so for me, where I've landed right now is that I believe that I've created thoughts or memories from watching years of porn, for example, right? So I have it. If I see for example, blonde woman in the street, right, and then I get a reaction, I believe that is a form of neuroplasticity, a form of coding from having watched a specific video or a specific scene multiple times, and you're programmed in a certain way. So I don't believe it's an actual attraction for that individual in terms of, you talked about connection there, Alison. I believe it comes down to, first of all, what it is you find attractive about the other person, right? So we've touched on this before with I did a little video on YouTube about what is the origin story in your relationship of the attraction, because if it's physical, it is highly likely that will go at some point because the body changes, right? And I cannot begin to imagine how difficult it is specifically for women. If they identify themselves as this attractive person, then they have to maintain a certain standard. Okay, that's why women invest heavily. I'm talking here from what I see in my experiences and observations, right? So it's talking about Botox, boob jobs, hair, etc., etc. That if you identify yourself as the body and as a physical person, and you think that's how you show up in the world, right? Then you're going to do everything you can to maintain that appearance. But if you realize that, I'm talking about from a spiritual perspective, if you realize that you're the mind, and that's not actually how you show up in the world in terms of your behaviors and how you treat people, then there's going to be a degree of flexibility around that, right? So I suppose it's very complex in terms of how do you define attraction, and what is it about an individual? Is when you see someone, is it more a memory of something else, or is it actually that person? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I want to. There's an amazing book that was one of the foundations of sexological bodywork called The Erotic Mind by Jack Morin, and it's
I'm going to make a note.
Yeah, I actually have it in the other room. I meant to, but it's amazing because it asks you to identify your peak experiences, your peak sexual experiences. So 2 real ones and 2 fantasy ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then from those peak experiences, what you would be able to identify is your core erotic theme. And once you've identified your core erotic theme, because there will be similarities across your peak sexual experiences, but in the book, he's talking about excitement plus obstacles equals arousal. So your arousal will have patterns and habits. And when I read that book for the first time, and I put my 2 real and 2 peak experiences, they can tell you what you're always going to be, what the gift of arousal will be. Mm-hmm. And it turns out to be your core erotic theme, not about individuals. But the peak experiences come from, they're usually firsts and surprises, perfect partners and situations, and times that either time speeded up or stood still. So understanding, I mean, I've listened to loads of people talk about their peak experiences over the past few years. But when you realize what your patterns are, you can look back and go, oh my God, I've been doing that since I was about 15.
Yes, love it.
People in different patterns.
This is what causes you to be turned on.
Yes, and
it's the memory you attach to that arousal.
Yeah, and that's why it's called your erotic mind. I'm running a workshop on this in Berlin. So understanding your erotic psyche is really, so that we need to come with our hearts and souls. So our hearts will tell us about love. Our bodies are the places where we experience pleasure, even though sometimes we experience indirect pleasure through someone else, someone else having pleasure. But then our minds can kind of make meaning of things. So what we're trying to do is get all of that aligned so that we're turning up for experiences that are going to be fulfilling for us and the people we're hanging out with. Now, as I said, I've never been married, but turning up for this, how do we keep, the big question that Esther Perel asks in Mating in Captivity is, how do we keep desire alive in long-term relationships?
And is that the objective, of course, to be in?
Yeah, if you want to be, I suppose.
So let's assume that, again, it's back to this horrible assumption of we're trying to talk for other people. Let's assume you want to be in a long-term, maybe you're married and you want to make that marriage work. Esther Perel, she's pretty negative on the concept, I think, of long-term heteronormative relationships. I think she even says it's impossible.
Yeah, and I think, but what happens is you have to have a bridge to cross, to get that attraction plus the obstacle to keep arousal alive. But the thing is, so you grew up in a Catholic household. What you might not know, but I found out for myself, is guilt is an aphrodisiac.
Wow. Is it?
I found that out doing a role play with a confession to a priest. It was so hot. Yeah. But, and so so overcoming guilt is a really hard thing, but you have to do that by being naughty. That's the transformative quality of guilt. If anger's the thing that's getting in your way, that can be transformed into passion. And the other one is fear. The anxiety can be transformed into courage and finding your power. So there is a lot you can do, but you're not going to get it. You're not going to find this unless you actually, in my experience, there's this willingness to change that is really at the heart of this. Because, lots of people think they're open-minded, but actually, are you open-minded to doing breath work, to doing men's work, to going to therapy, to learning a different thing than just that conveyor belt thing? Are you open to learning about kink? Are you open to learning about tantra? There's so much, but we either have to change our beliefs or change our behavior.
Changing
our behavior changes our beliefs. But we have to change about our beliefs about what's possible for us and what we're allowed as well, what we're allowed to be and say and think, and I think we're much bigger than we think, and this topic is much bigger than we can imagine.
So again, if you thank you, Alison, putting your relationship hat on versus your being single hat on, sexual compatibility, everyone's an individual. People have this arousal. They have different things that historically have given arousal to each individual. Then you meet someone, whether that's a short-term thing or a long-term thing. Is it about compatibility in sex? And I guess ultimately, again, very different dynamics, having a short-term sexual liaison with someone for pleasure versus the sexual needs compatibility of within a long-term relationship where everything is different. And again, how do you talk about both without almost contradicting them? And I think maybe, again, depending on who may benefit from watching this, going back a step, is sex can you have a very healthy long-term relationship and have having bad sex and no connection in it? Or in your personal opinion, can you have a sexless marriage that's fulfilling and works?
I mean, lots of people do, but I don't think I'm the right person to ask about that, really. I think we need to ask the people who have sexless marriages whether.
Yes, okay.
But I don't.
But we're all. But at this. But again, going back to this concept in the United Kingdom, in most Western countries, marriage and all around the world is the holy grail, and you're not. We stay married because of different reasons, and there's a lot of extremely good qualities in having a good marriage. Is intimacy and sexual intimacy necessary to have a fulfilling long-term relationship? Maybe both partners have checked out of it. Maybe one is at a different level. And we were going on to talk about erectile dysfunction and hormone issues in middle age. So let's be honest, you hear a lot of stuff on the internet about how once the kids arrive, the sex life evaporates. And it goes from the first early bird couple of years of pre-kids where you're having a great sort of lustful sexual connection, and it generally peters off. And I think that causes a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of frustration, either to one party, to both parties. So the question is to be proactive about it. If that's happening in your relationship, you're in that situation, post kids, let's assume that's you. What would you advise that person to do? And let's assume they're a man. And you're in a relationship that's not sexually fulfilling. You love your wife or husband dearly, but there's issues. Do you just assume, oh, it happens, everyone's in this situation, we're tired, the kids are here, what advice would you give those people, if there is any?
Do you have any questions, Mark, or is that as well before I try to answer that?
Well, I believe I understand what Ed is saying. Do I have any questions? No, I'll let you answer the question.
Let me answer that one.
Yes, you do.
I met a young couple on Saturday, and they just got 2 small children, and finding time for them and intimacy. I mean, I'm a sex coach, so I'm going to say that intimacy really matters. What that intimacy looks like is up to the couple, but for that you have to have choices. So one of the things that I think is the greatest thing, or possibly the greatest thing in 10 years that I've discovered, is the wheel of consent. So I'm going to ask you, Ed, may I touch you?
Well,
just may I touch your shoulder?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So these questions of may I and will you, so may I touch you? May I touch your beard? Like, these things can be small questions of, rather than assuming sex has to be some sort of, massive feat and everything's all got to be back onto this conveyor belt. Actually, this touch, because Emily Nagoski's just brought out a new book, and she says fundamentally people have to be friends first, and you have to learn about this thing of, like, may I touch you, or may I hug you, or will you hug me? And these questions of may I and will you that form the basis of the wheel of consent, and the answer being yes, no, maybe, that you start there instead of start where you want to get to over there of performance, orgasm. So actually what we're doing is then, like, small things, like small intimacy.
It's difficult not to feel connection.
So that, this young couple with kids, it's like what they were asking me to do is like, how, if there's this male desire that then feels pushed out because there are children, like, how do you keep it? Will be difficult for a couple of years or 20 years with kids. It will be, but how the thing is to mitigate it so that one touch doesn't have to lead to sex, because that's what stops everything. Because if you think one touch, oh, here we go. But actually, if a hug was just a hug, or you did some passionate kissing,
so
or had a bath together.
Wow. Yeah. So the expectation, particularly with men, I think, and please challenge me on this, Mark, is that we believe that sex, because we masturbate a lot as children, as pubescent adults, which we do, and that's just the way it is. And sorry if that offends anyone, but boys do like. You can't laugh. We have to talk about these things. I know it's difficult for people. Look, if it's a really good thing, like, so basically, young boy. Should be careful what I say here.
That was the bit.
Boys over 16 masturbate.
Yes. Okay,
right?
cool. Thank you.
That's what boys do, and then so therefore we become fixated with the concept. And trust me, it really. I come from a very prudish, conservative family, so this is very difficult for me. So that concept, and I believe this, challenge me on this, that concept of masturbating to ejaculation is creating part of the problem that you're saying, is that men are becoming fixated that sex is about, and you said it earlier, is about orgasming to ejaculate. And actually, to survive in most relationships, it cannot be about that, because the expectation is totally off. It's off for longevity, it's off in terms of physical performance, and actually it's off that women do not generally think like that, I think, is that generally. So is that Mark? Is that fair comment? Please back me up on this. Otherwise, I look like a solitary masturbator.
Well, I'm glad that you were specific about the children are boys over 16 years of age. Couple of things, yeah, guys. Ed, I do believe you're right. I believe that men, and we are generalizing, have been conditioned to believe that ejaculating is the end goal here, right? When actually, if we were to change the narrative around that, I believe you would have deeper, more meaningful relationships, right? If you were to, if that was not the end goal. I really like, Alison, what you were saying about this "may I, will you," the wheel of consent. That's come up a few times for me. That's from I think it's in a book, isn't it?
Betty Martin.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Dr. Betty Martin. It's amazing. It's absolutely rocking our conscious sexuality world.
Brilliant.
If you can get to go on a wheel of consent workshop, it's amazing.
So I really like that. And while I was listening to you guys, it's this whole. You're talking about Ed, about guys fulfilling needs in a marriage after children. You mentioned children coming. For me, it starts with why, right? So why are couples not having sex? And naturally, you start to think about your own experience of being in a relationship where you stopped having regular sex. And there's a brilliant book, The Way of the Superior Man, that talks about how 90% of men think about sex all the time, right? Every day. 10% of men don't think twice about it. I am one of those 10%, right? It's not something I think about very often. It's not something that I enjoy having sex, but it's just not something I think about. And I go back to this idea of why a couple's not having sex in the marriage. And I know from my own experiences that when I didn't want to have sex, it was because of body shame that I had developed myself. That I had either put on weight, I had stopped exercising, I was struggling at work, and my partner was very sexually active, and I would regularly say no because I felt unsexy, right? And I think a powerful part of masculinity, of both sexes, is this feeling of, am I sexy? Do I feel sexy? This confidence. And that, I think, if you can change the narrative around that and make people create their own definition of what that feels like for them, we'd live in a much better place. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Right?
Thank you for sharing that, because that was very tender to hear that, and to understand that in this, one of the things that when we don't feel like it, we can't even say that either. We have to make up something else, you know. And so then, you know, there's so many people why reasons why people do want sex and why they don't, but it's very hard for this mismatched desire when there's one partner, you know, that does want more and one partner that does want less. Where is it? Because actually the person with the lowest desire controls the amount of sex that is available in a relationship.
Yeah.
And Betty Martin always says, you know, you have to go at the pace of the slowest. But it's because, you know, again, we come back to this. If it was about pleasure, if it was about connection, if it was about intimacy, if it was about being able to say who you are and use that ground as a place where we witness each other, where we're friends, where we can bring what's worrying us. And we also are not too reliant on our partner to be the only person of that. I think I once read something like we only get 25% of our needs met in relationship. And when I read that, I was horrified because, you know, at the time I really wanted a much more connected relationship.
So what I've heard there is, are you saying that sex is part of about showing up in the world as a true, authentic version of knowing yourself with honesty and vulnerability, and seeking to find the things that are really meaningful to you with a person, a partner, maybe that's a short term or long term. And sex will be beautiful and fulfilling if you're able to turn up with that other person in your most vulnerable, honest, truest self, because that's what will lead to growth, like in all things in life. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I'm not only saying that. That's one way of doing it, but also, you know, I know lots of people who are into kinky. You know, I've spent a bit of time in conscious kink. So actually,
what is that?
Well, you might call it BDSM.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not necessarily beautiful there, you know, because there might be, but for that, what you're turning up is to do shadow healing, like to bring out, I don't know, your dominance or your it's like this thing about guilt, like so that you can bring the things that are tricky there to try to look at them. So then sex can be healing. It doesn't always have to be beautiful and loving. Sometimes you want to have sex and you never want to see the person again. But this idea that we're being honest and then can express that.
Oh, right. Would you say, I don't know a lot about BDSM, but would you say a lot of it is as you said, is a complex emotional need behind the sex, that people are doing it for slightly different reasons than maybe it's not necessarily just a sexual gratification, or it's there's something deeper there?
Okay. There's always something deeper. I mean, if we reduce sex just to that physical act of PIV that I talked about earlier, then, you know, I mean, it would be like, if that was all it is, that'd be like eating fish and chips every night. You know, you wouldn't want to do that. I mean, that's why people don't turn up for sex, because
it's boring. I'm going to say it. It's too boring. We want less fish and chips and more
sushi sometimes.
And more scampi.
No, but to keep showing, we've got to, you know, it's not that, I mean, I hate to generalize, but it can often be said that people switch off sex, but it's not. It's that they switch off the kind of sex they're offered. If there was more intimacy, variety, self-expression, who wouldn't show up?
That's the issue, though, isn't it? It's not it's not how you're having sex or the act of having sex. It's the intimacy that creates that safe environment to try and do stuff and be yourself with that person you care and love about.
Be creative, be playful,
Yeah.
be, I mean, but getting away from this, all, all sex has to lead to orgasm and ejaculation.
Yeah.
Because that's the pause. I mean, since I started doing tantra, meeting men who've been through conscious sexuality, this idea that you have to come and that's the sign of good sex is really off, because once you get into your body and the energy, like your energetic, this feeling of energy, or the feeling of from your skin, so the attention is not always in the genitals, but it's more like how we touch. And so then there's a much greater repertoire, and being able to learn to say, could we try this? Or I'd love to try that. And being okay with a no, and not going into real rejection, but just doing something else instead. Betty Martin has this game called the 3-minute game, where you take it in turns to say, how would you like to be touched? And how would you like to touch me? And you have a timer. Oh my God, I've had some of the most fantastic experiences playing that game, because it's absolutely changed the way of what I do and what I believe sex to be.
It's a great tip.
The 3-minute game, because you don't get stuck in anything.
What comes to mind will come out in that conversation.
So it might be like, for 3 minutes, I just want you to lie on me, or for 3 minutes, let's do some passionate kissing, but each time you stop.
It's brilliant.
And you choose, and then you do something else, and we really know who it's for, because it's because often there's this thing about men always feeling they have to give, i.e. do, and it breaks that whole pattern as well of giving equals doing, because often there's a lot of guesswork in sex, like I'm trying to work out what your body does so that I can make you, not you, but we're looking at our partner to try to get some affirmation, like the body's a machine in front of us, that if I just squeeze this and touch that, then this will happen and job done. I'm a great lover. But actually, if we can drop that, because gosh, as I feel for you men, if that's what you think is expected of you.
I think it's a good point, Alison. I think there is a lot. I know, certainly feel it myself. There is this idea that our job is to get to an orgasm, and ideally it's to, if the woman is not having an orgasm and we're not having an orgasm, then that's a failing in that sexual, and that leads to a lot of complex emotions. And I think it must be quite soul destroying if you're in a relationship where there isn't that. Again, if your expectation is an orgasm for your partner and probably for yourself, and that's not happening on a regular long-term basis, that's pretty emotional, I imagine. So
again, that's such a limited version of what's possible for eroticism, and yet everything rests.
So why are we so hard on ourselves?
Because you don't know what you don't know. Because you don't know what you don't know. I think this is an educational piece, right? This is purely education. You're not taught it at school. Most men are not. This is from talking from experience, observation, conversations over the last 20 years. Most men are getting their sexual education through porn. That would then be sensible to assume why they believe that ejaculation is the end goal, and this whole penetration thing as well. Like that's the all roads lead to Rome, right? That is the educational piece. We are then literally taking that information into our relationship without using tools, exercises like the 3-minute game, asking someone, how do you like to be touched? Right? Even that type of question is extremely powerful. And it all comes down to effective communication, right? So can you imagine being a female who goes into a relationship with a man that has been educated in this way? Very unlikely that that they've been educated in this way, and their understanding of what good looks like. It's about conversation and information. And if there was a way to, because let's be honest, I don't think schools are going to start talking about tantra sex, right? Or how men should be pleasuring women, et cetera, et cetera. So what if parents took the responsibility for going on their own journeys and then educating their kids in a healthy way? So that for me makes, some people might not like the sound of that, but that for me makes a lot of sense, right? Because I would rather avoid the sexual education that I had, to then take that into the marriage and have that idea of what good looks like or what needs to be done, etc. Something as just even making somebody aware of, like I said, the tool of the 3-minute game, is extremely powerful. And then you start to phase out those other ideas.
I think sorry, Mark, go on.
No, that was it. The other ideas of penetration being the ultimate goal and all that good stuff. But the reality is, as well, is that men could do, again, it comes down to education, understanding that all women are different and they all orgasm in different ways. But where would you learn that unless you proactively went out and, I liked what you were saying, Alison, about this guessing game. Very much is, touch you there, did you like that? And you want to, because of the nature of the engagement, you want to avoid questions like, "Oh, is that nice?" Right? That all those types of things. So it's extremely complex, and it takes people like you, Alison. It takes us, Ed, as guys. We should be more open and willing to have these conversations, regardless of how awkward they make us feel.
And be in the moment. When you introduced me, you said erotic and personal freedom, and that comes in the moment rather than thinking, "Oh, this is not like my ex-boyfriend," or "This is not like I saw in that film." Like in the moment. How would you like to be touched? And in this moment, and then you can, embodiment is really important. Not what do you like, but how would you like to be touched? So then you have to go, "Oh, actually, could you put your hand on my knee? It really hurts."
It does, actually. I've got a bad knee, Mark. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
And so if touch is healing, nurturing, erotic, peaceful, comfortable, when we move around these different kinds of touch, then sometimes it's brilliant to do. So
how just sorry to interrupt. Were you finished?
Sorry. No, that's okay.
So just being proactive then, looking for people that are watching this to be helpful, right? Let's assume they're men, because we're men and we're a men's platform. What are the things that you can signpost to guys who are maybe not feeling like they're very confident? Maybe the relationship is suffering. Maybe they don't think maybe they're not getting it. What would you say is some steps that they can take to become more fully in their sexual essence and being? How do they explore their sexuality? Whether they're in a relationship, let's assume they're in a relationship or they want to be in a healthy relationship. What are the steps that men need to take from a woman's perspective and a sex coach that will hopefully improve their relationship and their connection with their lover?
That's a great question. Get off the internet, get off the sofa.
What does a woman want, Alison? Let's go straight to that.
Yeah, I'm really. I mean,
that is the one. That's the question I wrote here. Is what is the one thing? What is the one thing? If you had a magic wand, what is the one thing that you wish men knew about women? In order to create that intimacy, that connection. You've listened to this and you go, "Do you know what? I'm fed up of just penetrating my missus, etc. I want to learn how to please her to new levels. I've heard conscious kink. I've heard tantra. What do I do now?
You forget this idea that it's all up to you to please someone else. What we need to do is, because that puts pressure on as well. Like, it's not your, everybody's got their own unique sexuality. So finding ways of going to men's groups, well, it's a men's audience, but men's group, wheel of consent, broadening the sense of what's possible. Read some books. Don't, turn off, don't watch porn, watch Esther Perel, because this idea of that puts a lot of pressure on men to think that you have to, I mean, I'm not saying don't please a woman, but it's not, listen, if I had one thing that I've really learned, because I think when I was younger, I was in performance as well, that I had to please a man. But now it's like giving more space around things, like not
more
trying to fix
more
me,
time and space,
not trying to tell me I'm a drama queen, not trying to come up with solutions all the time, but to listen. And for me, novelty and variety and that thing has been very powerful, but that's not every person's experience. Some people want something that's much more, friendship, or kind of this admission that none of us really know what we're doing, but these small steps, I think. I'd tell anybody to go to a Wheel of Consent course.
Yeah. Does it start with the guys watching this saying to their partner, whoever it is, short, long term, are you okay? Are you happy with our sex life? Let's talk about it. Does it stop? Because I don't think that happens. Maybe that's just me. But isn't that what men should be doing? Is making inquiry and talking about these really difficult conversations with their partners for the sake of the love that they clearly have towards each other, which, isn't that, Mark, what we should all be asking men to do, is to step up and ask?
Well, while listening to you, my mind takes me to previous experiences, and it's the woman as well, isn't it? Because going back to the story that I shared with you, me not wanting to have sex because of how I felt about myself resulted in my partner at the time thinking that she was unattractive, when it literally had nothing to do how I felt about her. I just didn't like myself. So it's a case of, it circles back nicely to this effective communication piece and asking open questions. And it's, how do you feel about our sex life? How often would you like to have sex? Out of 10, how would you rate our sex life? Just ask better questions as a starting point to, I suppose there's an element of, if you ask a closed question, it would be potentially quite direct. It could be intimidating. But ultimately, yes, like with everything that we talk about, Ed, it is about confronting the brutal truth. And if you are a man in a marriage who is one of the 90%, right, and you do have desires and you feel like you can't be your authentic self because you're not talking about that with your wife, then you must, if you want to stay in that relationship, you must find a way to express yourself. That's kind of like a given, right? It's the same with being vulnerable about any of the self-sabotaging behaviors that we talk about. There must be a way, but it's hard because you're then relying on that being met with no judgment or shame, or how dare you say, it's you've got to really trust your environment.
Betty always says the question to ask during intimate moments is, are you enjoying this, and what would make it better? So that people feel free to adjust. And
it's a lot of words.
Are you in? The
Hello,
question
darling.
to ask yourself: am I enjoying this?
Right.
And what would make it better?
Oh, okay.
So could you slow down?
Yeah.
Could you touch me
so,
here?
So verbal communication during sex, and a lot of people, I'm sure, will be sitting there going, well, I don't want to, my wife isn't talking, I'm not talking, we're very silent. Do you think that's important to be verbally communicating during sex? I do personally, but
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
it creates a lot of understanding, and I think it certainly is good for intimacy to have a conversation, to talk. But I suspect a lot of people don't.
And to pause. Yeah, to get off this habit
of PIV, as you call it. Is that what
PIV?
PIV.
Yeah.
So again, that's moving into more tantra type things, where again, sex can be orgasm is delayed, and there isn't this expectation of outcome of ending up with an ejaculation. And again, getting into the nitty gritty, I think a lot of men that I've spoken to in the last couple of years are surprised when you talk about the fact that, again, a lot of it's about time. If you've got 2-3 kids running around downstairs, you've been at work all week, you probably don't have hours to be. So make some time to create intimacy, to not be having rush sexual encounters, so you can invest like you do in other things in the relationship. You can invest consciously in spending some time away from the stresses of life, and really invest in that experience where it's not about just the end in mind, and there's more time to really relax and come into your bodies and get to know each other more intimately. And of course, people go, well, going away for a dirty weekend, which again is a very British, embarrassing way of saying mum and dad are off and we're at the grandparents'. I mean, that again is ridiculous. This is a, if you take a step back, this is a beautiful, important thing to keep relationships alive. And yet we refer to in the UK as we're off on a dirty weekend. I mean, it's just absurd, right? It's any wonder that people have got shame around sex. So we need to change that narrative that sex is a beautiful, necessary, important part of a loving relationship, and can be a one-night stand and incredibly erotic. So again, it's whatever your choice is. If you're watching this, there's no judgment. It's not, there isn't one life story for everyone, and there's no judgment being married, not married, in whatever relationship you're in. And I think that's the main thing here, is that you find a level of sexuality that is fulfilling to you, creates intimacy, makes you feel good about yourself and your relationship, and makes your partner feel good and safe and aroused, and it's fun and it's joyous and it's a beautiful thing, sex is. And we shouldn't be sitting there jerking off, frankly, in the bathroom, and lying to our wives about it, which I candidly, hand on heart, think that a lot of men have done or do. And it's just not healthy. It's not a healthy way. I've done it, and I know from lots of men I've spoken to that there's a lot of secrets with it. And let's try and bust that taboo, that there's nothing to be afraid of. And I think, having cautioned that, if you go downstairs and talk to your partner and say, I've got some fantasies about the woman in the office, then maybe I wouldn't advise that as straight away. But I think maybe broaching the subject of these things at the right time, it's got to be done in a very, very, again, what's the point of it, right? The point of, why would you bother saying that? Because again, what's the desired outcome of advising on these things to your partner? Some things you say, maybe, unless you're wanting to act on them. However, it's better than having an affair, just following my logic through. Surely it's better to talk about things than rather going down the mechanics of how most people let these things breed, and then a thought becomes something else, and then that is acted upon. And I would have thought, if your objective is a long-term relationship, that running off and having an affair is probably the worst thing you can do, and it would be better to counter that before you get to that point, if your desired outcome is that you love your wife and you want these things to last. So again, is honesty in that instance is probably a good thing.
There's so many things that can contribute to the word that I'm thinking of is like an everyday sensuality, where it's like an ongoing connection in the relationship, where intimacy is the glue that holds things together, instead of being I hate this expression where people call it a need, because actually that really minimizes it to something. And instead, what if it was something that could be deeply enjoyable, emotionally connecting? And so to try to move to something where the pressure for sex decreases, but the place and what it could. I mean, I'm a bit of an idealist about all of this, but there's always more to do. I think complacency or thinking it doesn't matter is a real killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but addressing it is pretty tricky because, you know.
But what's the alternative? If you're not truthful about that man in the office, that woman, if you're not truthful about things and you're hiding them because you don't want to hurt someone, then surely it leads to a worse outcome long run.
Yeah, the truth.
And if your sex life is getting stayed and just ignoring it because it's painful, is not going to be the right, because one of you will go off and find attention elsewhere. Surely that's what happens, as far as I know. You know, if both of you check out of and don't talk about it, one of you is going to at some point have your head turned. And I, from personal experience of talking to people, that's what happens. But I think the other thing is that it's not just about the sex, it's about the connection between two people. The sex is almost a peripheral to that, because if the connection goes, the intimacy goes, the ability to connect and find that sort of bond, if that goes, the sex is kind of irrelevant, because the sex doesn't hold the relationship together. I mean, it may provide some staples at some point, but it's not. If the connection isn't there, there won't be great sex. There can't be. I mean, not in a long term.
Show up for something that's going to be satisfying. You know, that's why people stop showing up, because I mean, fundamentally, if we think that the heteronormative model is pretty broken, and people are trying to create a marriage within a fairly constrained condition structure. And it took me 10 years of this to kind of go, wow, all that thing that I always thought I wanted, wow, it's such a limited model. So I think we all have to forgive ourselves for trying really hard, for trying to hold some crumbling structure as well, you know. And so I wonder whether the honesty is just like, wow, this is kind of difficult to hold together, and I wonder how we're going to do this. So you're sort of in it together, rather than, you know.
That's a good way to tackle it, I think. It's difficult, right? It's a very difficult thing to maintain if the goal is a long-term relationship, which I believe we're all looking for, that person, that partner, that connection, that soulmate. I mean, for me personally, that's something that, you know, you do hope there is your person out there. So if that is generally how everyone else thinks, and not everyone does, but let's assume that's the model that we live upon, then it does make a lot of sense what Alison is saying, is that has to start from a place of we're in this together to create a great life together.
Isn't that the ultimate fantasy?
Well, it may be a fantasy,
but I mean, I'm on a panel about fantasies on Sunday, and that everyday fantasy, I think, is a bit of a killer. That there is this perfect partner, and a soulmate.
There isn't. We know there isn't. We know there isn't. But you know, it gives you something to think about, really.
What if admitting? I mean, these days, I think I wanted that for so long, and then I got a bit disillusioned. So now, when I have the encounters, I'm not even looking for a relationship, but actually there's something so much more precious in it now when I do meet up with, you know, my friends that I can do erotic things with, and then it's just like, it's this real gift of time, attention.
But your connection in that moment is equally wonderful in different ways. Just because it's not what maybe society is expecting. So anyway, we're going off topic a little bit here. Mark, are you looking you're looking perplexed?
No, not at all. I'm listening. I'm listening.
Have you drifted off
on the couch
onto a fantasy that you'd like to share with us?
No, not at all.
Is there anything you'd like to ask?
The big thing for me was this notion of moving away from performance. This is all this is you're shifting your identity, right, to think slightly differently. It's Alison talks about this willingness, right? The willingness to change and just open your mind. And, you know, whether it be in the marriage, about how you perform as a father, or how you show up as a father, or how you show up in terms of the communication. It's the same. It's the same with sex, right? So if you move away from thinking it's a performance and that outcome needs to happen, then you're just going to be in a much, much better place. And obviously we're talking about people that are in relationships. I can't. What you were talking about there, Ed, I think I share a similar view with Alison in terms of, I think that I don't believe there's a soulmate for everybody. I think the soulmate that you're looking for, I'm talking from my experience, is in yourself. And that's why I liked what you were saying, Ed, about this, that I believe you can have great sex when you feel sexy, and you're then showing up because you're being authentic, because you're working hard to feel great, because you're doing all the positive things around exercise, movement, body, like all that type of stuff. But I can only talk from experience, because when I didn't do those things, I just didn't feel sexy.
Yeah.
And then didn't want to do anything. So that would be.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm conscious of time, so maybe if we move to wrap up in the next 5 minutes, is that okay with you? So
I'm just wondering what it is. I think the thing that helped me was understanding, instead of waiting for someone else, learning about my own power to initiate, change things as well.
So you became more confident in how you showed up in terms of your relationships.
Good touch first, and then from that got more, instead of hoping something nice would happen.
Right.
To learn I through all the trainings, to be able to choose what happened to me, instead of just hope something nice would happen. And so I think that gave me a lot of confidence. And so it's those things, isn't it? When we have had good encounters or good sex, what qualities were present there, which brings us back to those peak experiences again. And of course, they're not happening on every Tuesday night while you're doing the washing up, but those qualities of what was there when you did have good erotic encounters.
So is this thinking about what kind of experiences, places, types of people, what makes you as an individual watching this? What are the things that turn you on? What are the things that you can? What would you say to that person beyond that?
Do you need to be present?
But is it almost spending time thinking about your sex life and how you're showing up in it? What makes you feel sexually confident, for not worrying about what's turning you on from someone else, but what makes you feel aroused, or what makes you feel comfortable in your sex life? When are the best experiences you've had? Why were they good experiences? How can you replicate that in your relationship on an ongoing basis with the adaptability to change and to have those conversations and be honest and vulnerable about that with your partner?
Honesty and vulnerability, and listening to Mark talk about how that changed, how you could change it, from not wanting to show up, through feeling good in yourself, whether that's mentally or physically, but also understanding that, sometimes I think if I'm feeling down, I don't think unless I can entertain somebody, then I can be intimate. But actually, what is it if you can go to someone and say, actually, can I have a 5 minute needy moment? Or because I hate feeling needy, but I used to have a boyfriend where I could go, can I have a 5 minute needy? Can I have a needy 5 minutes? And it kind of took it out of the way. I think this creativity about intimacy is really important, rather than really restricting sex. Back to what we said, we're all on the conveyor belt and we're going this way.
We're on the locomotive to the I don't know how to sum this conversation up, Mark. It feels like we've talked about everything and we've talked about nothing.
Should I do it?
Maybe that was just Can you do it?
I'll go for it.
I've struggled today.
Ed, you showed up. That's all that matters. You showed up and you gave it.
We had a nice time.
Good.
Yeah, you gave it your best shot.
So,
a couple of key things that I've learned then, understanding that core erotic theme, right? That the two real experiences and the two alternatives. And that if you were saying about thinking there, Ed, I think if you were to if you're an individual watching this, reflect on if you use that as a tool initially and understand that these are patterns, right? So understand that if you're finding someone attractive, etc., just understand where that comes from, whether it's a real experience or a false experience, and this notion of moving away from performance outcomes, ejaculation, be willing to explore new ideas, tantra, conscious kink, effective communication, be vulnerable in the relationship, talk about what you truly desire, how you like to be touched, how do they like to be touched, a 3-minute game, right? There are a number of, it's all about willingness to open your mind. It really is as simple as that. As hard as you think as it might be, it starts with somewhere. And that first step is always the hardest. So go and be vulnerable with your, for me, it's always, well, would you rather stay in the relationship where you're not having sex and you're too scared to have the conversation and stay in it for 15, 20 years, or do you have the difficult conversations, right? But no, I think absolutely brilliant. Betty Martin, Dr. Betty Martin, was that right, Alison? I'm gonna, yeah, the wheel of consent. You know, even being aware of something like that is going to be a big step for anybody listening to this. So thank you very much.
Very well summed up. Very well put, Mark. Thank you for that. Great summary. Thank you, Alison. Great conversation. Let's do it again, maybe
really
at some point.
That was very pleasurable, I thought.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. It was very pleasurable.
Oh, good. Well, there we go.
Fantastic.
Thank you for
Alison,
coming.
where can people find you if someone's listened to this and I could really do with a sex coach? How can they connect with you?
I've got a website called Sex School for Grown-Ups, and then there's also the YouTube channel which is called The Sex Lectures, and you can find all sorts of topics. They're 12-minute talks on different aspects of sex, but the Sex Lectures is just fantastic. Just awesome. To find out all the things that are possible that you might never have imagined, because if you can't imagine it, you can't ask for it.
Yeah, 100%.
So guys, on that note, go and invest in your sex life, and I think we'll end it on that. Mark, thank you very much. Great to see you, and thank you, Alison.
Thanks, Ed. See you later, bud.
Thank you for listening to this Blue Mind conversation. We hope you've enjoyed the content, and ask a small favour that you like and share the page. The bigger the page, the more interesting the guest should be, and the more content we can put out. If you are interested in talking to Mark and myself about any of the topics covered, coaching, speaking, or any other collaboration, please drop Mark or I an email at ed@Blue Mind Approach or mark@Blue Mind Approach, or contact us on our social media channels. Thank you for listening.